And here to say a few words on behalf of the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex is Vice President of Operations and Guest Engagement, Mr. Howard Schwartz. Howard?
Welcome. Thank you for joining us today at Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. It is our honor to host today's ceremony to welcome NASA astronauts Roy Bridges and Senator Kelly into the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame. It's an exciting time here at Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex with some amazing new additions like our Peanuts All Systems Are Go show. Snoopy, what are you doing here today? You're not being inducted. Okay, I will make sure that they know that, but you have to get going. Your show's about to start in Universe Theater. Sorry about that, folks, but Snoopy just wanted to make sure that I mentioned this brand new immersive show that we have just created starring Snoopy, Woodstock, and all of the Peanuts gang. Guests can see the entire Peanuts gang as they're called by launch director Charlie Blackwell Thompson to assist with NASA's Artemis mission. From training for the mission to testing the Orion spacecraft, guests can go on a sensational, out-of-this-world 20-minute adventure full of history, education, and imagination. And who can forget, just 1 year ago, we launched Gateway, the Deep Space Launch Complex. This is a focus on the present and the future of the collaboration of space exploration. Guests can experience the interstellar travel of tomorrow while celebrating everything that's happening today in NASA's space program. Visitors are surrounded by actual flight-flown artifacts, full-scale models, and interactive exhibits all throughout the hall. And then they can travel to the future on the spaceport of the future to embark on one of 4 incredible space journeys on our brand new motion theater ride, Spaceport KSC. You can fly to destinations like Mars, TRAPPIST-1. You can go see a Horsehead Nebula, or even explore the rings of Saturn. These new additions, along with all of our other great attractions, and the possibility of seeing 80 to 90 launches this year, make it an amazing place to visit the Visitor Complex. Thank you again for joining us today, and congratulations to this year's inductees. Now, I would like to welcome Kurt Brown, Chair of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, to the stage to say a few words.
Well, good. Let me check here. Are you on schedule? Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Howard, for the introduction, and thank you all for being with us today for this momentous occasion. I'm not sure if I'm up to following Snoopy. They kind of sprung that on me, but we'll do our best here. As chairman of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation and a fellow astronaut, it brings great joy to be here among so many friends from the astronaut community and along with the Kennedy Space Center guests that we have today looking down on us. To celebrate the induction of Roy Bridges and Mark Kelly into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. In addition to establishing the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation to keep America at the forefront of technology, the Mercury 7 astronauts believe there should be a permanent place to showcase the accomplishments of America's pioneers. Their dream translated into a reality as the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame was created in 1990 and continues to live on in the Heroes and Legends featuring the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, presented by Boeing here at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. Thanks to the partnership with NASA and Delaware North, as well as the support of corporations and individual supporters, the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation awards a merit-based scholarship to more than 60 of the best and brightest students annually, and is known nationwide for being among the largest monetary scholarships to be awarded to undergraduate STEM students. Since its inception, ASF has awarded more than $8 million in scholarships to more than 700 of the nation's scholars. We are extremely, and that's an understatement, but we are extremely proud of our scholars and their accomplishments. In fact, we have a group of astronaut scholar recipients with us here today. Scholars, please stand up. And let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, guys. Now let's get back to the reason we're here for today's celebration. It is my pleasure to welcome Roy Bridges and Mark Kelly into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame. Thank you, and now it's time, or it's my honor, I should say, to introduce Bill Nelson, NASA Administrator, to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. In case you're wondering about the long relationship with Snoopy, it actually goes back to the Apollo days. Apollo 10, commanded by Tom Stafford. The command module was named Charlie Brown. The lunar lander was named Snoopy. And since Apollo 10 did not land, Snoopy was snooping for the landing site for Apollo 11. And that tradition has continued on to Artemis 1, the first test flight of the Space Launch System and the spacecraft Orion. Indeed, Snoopy was the zero-G indicator. The problem was that Snoopy's masters tightened his leash too tight so that he was floating near the floor, not in front of the camera, so that we didn't see him. Kurt, thanks for getting us kicked off here, and John Zarella, thank you for covering the space program as a journalist all those decades, and thank you for being our ultimate master of ceremonies. And the Kennedy Space Center is a site right here where America's story is written. When we walk these grounds, we feel America's can-do spirit, America's daring spirit. And this is a place that proves America can still do great things. These things that inspire us, these things that unite us, these things show that nothing is beyond our capabilities. What a fitting home for the Astronaut Hall of Fame. 105 adventurers, explorers, and pioneers have been bestowed with this honor. And today, we welcome 2 more. We are inducting an explorer whose life began on a Georgia dairy farm. From humble roots, he soared to the heavens. Roy Bridges piloted the Space Shuttle Challenger for an 8-day Space Lab 2 mission. He wore our nation's uniform, rising to the rank of Major General in the U.S. Air Force. He served as the center director for both the Kennedy Space Center and the Langley Research Center. And we're also inducting an adventurer whose parents were police officers. They encouraged him and his twin brother, Scott, to pursue lofty goals, to work hard, to give back. Mark Kelly did just that and served as a captain in the U.S. Navy. Mark spent more than 50 days in space and traveled over 20 million miles around our planet. He served as a pilot on 2 space shuttle missions and commander on another 2. And none of us will ever forget Mark's final flight, not just because it was the final flight of Endeavour, because it was a very short time after his wife, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, was shot at a town hall meeting. And she summoned the strength to watch her husband ascend upward for the final time. Her courage and strength continue to be an inspiration for all of us. And Mark showed us what it is to be a husband. Every astronaut has their own story. What links Roy and Mark is that they not only pushed the limits of humanity's reach, both showed their humanity, continuing to serve in NASA and our nation beyond their days as astronauts. As center director, as a U.S. senator. Both have that daring spirit, but also the spirit of a servant leader's heart. Americans and people from around the world will continue to come to the Astronaut Hall of Fame. Many of them will be children, members of the new generation, the Artemis generation. The students in the classroom today will one day be the first adventurers to walk on Mars. And when they come here, they will be filled with wonder. There are limitless possibilities because of the endless inspirations found in this museum. So Mark and Roy, thank you for daring to keep looking upward and pushing onward into the unknown. It's my privilege to introduce the Deputy Director of the Kennedy Space Center, Kelvin Manning.
So I have the unenviable task of speaking behind the NASA administrator. So anything I may repeat in my remarks, I do so for added emphasis. So let me start first with 2 questions. Do you know what agency has been ranked the best place to work in the federal government for the last 11 years in a row? That's right. Of course, it's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. And what NASA center has been ranked #1 for the past 5 years in a row? Well, look down at your feet. Yes, you're right here at the Kennedy Space Center. And how does that happen? Well, one word, leadership. And consider this, when the public thinks about NASA, who first comes to mind? Without question, it's our astronauts. The brave men and women who are trained to travel into the harsh environment of space, and despite these dangers, they continue to push the boundaries of space exploration. And make no mistake about it, no matter how routine it may look, human spaceflight is still a very dangerous business. Our astronauts lead by example. Their courage and pursuit of excellence set a high bar for the rest of us to follow. Because in human spaceflight, there is no room for error. So today we celebrate the extraordinary achievements of not just two astronauts, but two very accomplished leaders who have devoted their lives into serving this country. Roy Bridges, U.S. Air Force combat pilot, space shuttle pilot, retired Air Force Major General, then came back to NASA where he served as the director right here at the Kennedy Space Center and later the director of the Langley Research Center. Mark Kelly, U.S. Navy combat pilot, space shuttle commander, retired Navy captain, and now serves as a United States Senator from Arizona. Wow, really? And both men coincidentally honed their leadership skills early on while attending U.S. service academies. And there's a common thread there. Senator Kelly graduated from the United States Merchant Marine Academy, whose vision statement begins with these words: to educate and graduate leaders of exemplary character who are inspired to serve. And General Bridges is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, whose mission is to serve the Air and Space Force's premier institution for developing leaders of character. Some of you may say, we definitely have two characters here, but whose leadership have touched so many, their legacy still carries on today within NASA and beyond. And that leadership is clearly evident here at the Kennedy Space Center as we are continuing to launch humanity's future. After our space shuttle orbiters were put in museums, case in point, a lot of people thought we were going out of business. Instead, we have become Earth's premier spaceport through creativity and innovation. And look at the results. In 2011, there were 10 launches from Florida Space Coast. In 2022, 57. And this year, we have 94 on the manifest. Moreover, we're enabling more science than ever before and preparing the future for deep space exploration. After the very successful Artemis 1 mission, our Exploration Ground Systems program is working hard to upgrade the ground infrastructure to support the launch and recovery of Orion's first crewed mission, Artemis 2. In addition, just down the road in the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building, technicians are busily working on the Orion spacecraft, not only Artemis 2, but also for Artemis 3 and 4 as well. These spacecraft will return humans to the moon for the first time in more than a half century. So the Kennedy Space Center remains vibrant as we continue to ignite space exploration and discovery for all. As crewed flights are launching to the International Space Station at a regular cadence through our commercial crew program, plus we've also witnessed private astronaut missions lifting off from here, opening up a new chapter in human history. Our launch services program continues to be the agency's experts across the commercial rocket industry, leading the procurement of launch services for all NASA's uncrewed science missions, including the Psyche mission in October. Psyche will make humanity's first ever exploration of an asteroid made largely of metal, and the launch will be NASA's very first in a Falcon Heavy rocket. Accordingly, the launch service program continues to be Earth's bridge to space, helping us learn more about our home planet. And speaking of bridges, sorry Mark, we don't have a bridge named after you. We can talk about appropriations later, but the Roy D. Bridges Jr. Bridge still serves as a vital link between the Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, signifying the continued strong partnership between NASA and the Space Force, essential to the United States' leadership in space. So this morning, I speak for the men and women of the Kennedy Space Center to again offer congratulations to General Bridges and Senator Kelly, and moreover, to sincerely thank you for your leadership, past, present, and future, enabling us to continue NASA's mission here at truly one of the best places to work in the federal government, the Kennedy Space Center. Thank you very much.
That was good, Kelvin. You didn't have any problem following the administrator. That worked just fine. You folks up there probably have the best seat in the house. You doing all right up there? All right. Okay. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. It's now time to begin the induction of the 24th class of Space Shuttle astronauts into the Astronaut Hall of Fame. The 2023 inductees were selected by a committee of current Hall of Fame astronauts, former NASA officials, historians, and journalists. The process is administered by the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. To be eligible, an astronaut must have made his or her first flight at least 15 years before the induction. Candidates must be U.S. citizens and either a NASA-trained space shuttle commander, pilot, mission specialist, or an International Space Station commander or flight engineer who has orbited the Earth at least once and whose last day eligible for flight assignment as a NASA astronaut was at least 5 years prior to nomination. Our first inductee, Roy Bridges.
Very pleased to be back in Florida again, and I'm really looking forward to getting off the ground this time. We're ready, I'm sure the bird's ready, and we hope to have a lot of good things to show you from space and to tell you about when we get back. 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff. We have liftoff of Challenger in Space Lab 2. The shuttle has cleared the tower.
We're studying the sun, we're studying clusters of galaxies, we're mapping the infrared sky, we're measuring high-energy cosmic rays. I mean, we're probing the very secrets of the universe. And who could help but be excited about that?
Challenger, Houston for Roy.
And Roy's been listening. Pardon me for being a little inattentive, but we just happen to have some beautiful scenery over the Sahara here, and he had the camera in hand.
Well, I can understand that.
People are feeling good, the machine's running good. Got a lot to be thankful for. While we were looking out the window watching the world go by.
You know, for me personally, just a kid growing up poor in North Georgia, all I wanted was a chance to serve. And amazingly, I've had an opportunity to do that. But the thing that is the most enjoyable, not flying in space, not flying test airplanes or whatever else, but the real thrill has been serving with great teams, and none better than this team at the Kennedy Space Center. We are a people who live to explore. Thank God that we have people who are willing to take these risks.
Nice big smile this morning.
This is the best team on this planet. And don't you ever forget that.
Roy graduated first in his class at the Air Force Academy. Roy went on and became a fighter pilot. He flew on 51F.
Roy's a key part, a key member of the team that made each and every one of those 120 missions come about.
And we welcome your trip north as you begin to take over and run the Langley Research Center.
And in the end, Mr. Bridges is all about people first.
That is exactly the kind of person that you look up to, that's the person that you want to be.
It's not about us, it's about the mission. And it's the people that accomplish the mission. And my role here is just a part of being with this great team of people and doing my little part to try to help us focus not only the mission today, but the mission that we see us doing in the future.
Please welcome Roy Bridges. And here to present Roy Bridges for induction is Hall of Fame astronaut Dave Liesma. Dave?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you, Administrator Nelson and Director Manning, for being here with us today. It is with great honor to be able to introduce Roy Bridges to you here today. He has been a neighbor and a friend to me since our astronaut introduction in 1980. I want to thank the Astronaut Scholarship Federation for honoring him. And I would like to recognize Roy's special guests today, his sister Nancy and her husband Bob, his son Brian and his wife Jennifer. And I know that Roy's wife Benita would be happy for him today, but she passed away last year and is rejoicing with him in heaven. Roy has always placed a high priority on his family, and despite a multitude of moves throughout his career, his family has flourished. His dad and mom and his grandma and granddaddy were significant factors in his life as he grew up in rural Georgia. Roy's dad and granddaddy, as he called them, instilled in him a strong work ethic that has carried forward since a young age, even to this day. Getting the job done and doing it well has been a vital asset to his success. His family also developed in him a love for science and engineering. So think model trains, erector sets, and those kind of things like that. He dreamed of flying after seeing the Spirit of St. Louis in Washington, D.C., and even going to space after the Sputnik was launched. He sets high goals for himself and works very hard to achieve them. One of his goals was to fly airplanes. Now, did I say he came from rural Georgia? He persevered to get an appointment to the Air Force Academy, not an easy task from that start. It was an intriguing, sounded adventurous, was a great school, and led to an aviation job, exactly what Roy dreamed about. He excitedly told his dad about his idea, and together they worked for their process, and Roy became a member of the class of 1965. He excelled in both academics and leadership and graduated with distinction. He then proceeded to get his Master of Science degree in astronautics at Purdue University, and that's also where he met Benita, the love of his life. What a blessing. And then, right after that, he was off to flight school, got his wings, and he got married. Got married just in time to transition to the F-100 fighter jet and be sent to Vietnam for a year. After flying 226 combat missions, he returned safely to the United States and to Benita. He became an instructor pilot, but was soon selected into test pilot school. This was another of his dreams becoming a reality. There's kind of a trend here. Graduating with distinction, he was assigned to the A-10 development flight test team at Edwards Air Force Base. One day, Roy landed number 2 in a section of 2 A-10s. And seeing that he was overrunning the number 1 aircraft slightly, he applied some brake pressure. Moments later, he lost control of the aircraft and it ran off the runway. The investigation board said it was pilot error and Roy was removed from the test team. But Roy knew he had not done anything wrong and he had not caused that incident. So he reviewed all the aircraft data, discovered a problem in the A-10 braking system, and wrote a strong rebuttal to the accident board's findings. Perseverance and hard work, that's Roy Bridges. The commanding general read Roy's report, agreed with Roy, and exonerated him. He also told the manufacturer to fix the problem. They came up with a solution called anti-lock braking. Thank you, Roy. A lot of us have been greatly aided by anti-lock brakes. His next move was to the Air Command and Staff College and then on to the Pentagon. There he learned that NASA was going to select a new group of astronauts to fly the new space shuttle. This was an opportunity to realize another one of the dreams of Roy's, flying in space. At last, it was not to be. He was interviewed but not selected. This was a major disappointment to him. He stayed at the Pentagon and then was transferred to the Las Vegas to develop and test new generation aircraft. Another dream job. While he was there, NASA put out another call for a class of shuttle astronauts. But Roy decided he wouldn't apply. NASA had already turned him down once, and why go through that again? But thankfully, some very wise bosses insisted that he apply again. And he submitted his application at the very last minute. And much to his surprise and delight, he was chosen to be a member of the astronaut class of 1980. Now, Roy did cause some of us in that class a bit of consternation. We were not to tell anyone of our selection until everyone had been notified. However, they couldn't find Roy. He had gone on temporary duty to Davis Mountain Air Force Base and was staying with Benita's parents in Tucson, Arizona. Eventually, he was tracked down. He accepted the offer with exuberance, and the rest of us could now come down off our clouds and tell somebody about it. I met Roy when we reported to the Johnson Space Center in July of 1980, and you could sense his tremendous value from his broad experience as a combat aviator, test pilot, program manager. He had a quiet confidence in his abilities and a great work ethic. He performed his various astronaut office jobs superbly. In my mind, Roy was a model astronaut. He worked hard and produced excellent results. To his surprise, but not mine, he was assigned as the first 1980 pilot to fly aboard the Space Lab 2 mission STS-51F. What a spaceflight experience that would be. The first launch attempt went well until just after main engine start, when all the engines shut down, a pad abort. Now that was a startling event, and I can imagine Roy feeling like CDR was thinking, what did you do? The next launch attempt a few weeks later went smoothly until 5 minutes into ascent, when a main engine shut down in flight. Thankfully, Challenger made it to orbit, though not as high as planned. Roy's reaction to the questioning looks from his crew was to say, I didn't touch anything. It was an automatic shutdown. Now you have to understand that rookie PLTs are kind of the go-to person if anything goes wrong. They're the ones that are looked at first until they can be proven that they didn't do it. Their successful abort to orbit required a significant number of changes to their flight plans and their checklists. And all these changes had to be sent up by teleprinter. Now, a lot of you probably don't know what a teleprinter is, but it's something that requires a lot of paper to generate a lot of information. Then the crew had to cut and paste or pen and ink those changes into their checklists. There were so many changes over the first several days that the teleprinter ran out of paper. Roy now had to remember something he had been trained to do months before, never expecting he would ever actually have to do it. It was a difficult, time-consuming task, but he and Story Musgrave completed the task and kept the mission planning on track. After landing, the close call during ascent prompted Roy to propose a series of astronaut family improvements that would really help the crew's families if there was another abort or incident. Nothing was done with it until after the Challenger accident, when almost all of his proposed ideas were formulated into a family support plan. All of us astronauts thank you, Roy, for your foresight in easing a lot of concern for us before every flight. Once back on Earth, Roy received another flight assignment and plowed right into it, tackling some very difficult and risky issues head on. Unfortunately, the loss of Challenger interrupted those efforts, and Roy began to work on return to flight. He was always ready to do whatever needed to be done, but this is where his astronaut career took an unexpected turn. The Air Force knew what a great leader Roy was, and they brought him back to the regular Air Force. Disappointed about leaving the astronaut corps, but completely professional, Roy headed off to command the flight test wing at Edwards Air Force Base. This began a series of new and ever more challenging assignments for Roy, and a long list of moves for Roy and Benita and Tanya and Brian. Roy rapidly advanced to Major General and demonstrated his outstanding leadership, inspiration, and innovation while serving in a wide variety of major command positions. He finally retired from the Air Force, but he didn't stay retired long. NASA needed a new center director for KSC and called on Major General Bridges. Roy accepted the challenge and was happy to return to the NASA fold. He loved to tell folks that he launched rockets for a living. Roy took over during a time of serious change. The shuttle was being transitioned to a private maintenance contractor, potentially affecting thousands of KSC workers. Roy is a leader who recognizes the importance of his people and made this difficult change a resounding success. Then he had to turn his attention to KSC's role in the construction and testing of the International Space Station. Roy realized what a big deal this was and set up a process called the Mission Equipment Integration Testing, or MEIT. Since ISS was going to be assembled on orbit, everything had to fit right the very first time in space, even though some of those fittings would be launched months or even years between flights. Thanks to Roy's leadership and KSC's efforts, the ISS was completed and is still flying strong. And he also had to deal with some tough events. While waiting with the NASA administrator for Columbia to land, he heard on the voice loops from Mission Control and recognized immediately the seriousness of the situation. He took the administrator to a private area and put into action the contingency action plan for loss of orbit. This was a very emotionally draining and difficult time, but Roy focused on the family's welfare and returning the center to flying the shuttle again safely and successfully. NASA now asked Roy to take the position of director of the Langley Flight Research Center. Significant budget cuts were looming, and sound leadership was needed to get the center through them. Roy's previous experience with budget cuts, rifts, and reorganizations allowed him to get Langley through this incredibly difficult time without a complete disruption of its workforce. Once the dust had settled on a smoothly running center, Roy decided that he would really retire this time. Unfortunately, it didn't take very long before he failed retirement again. He took a series of management positions with Northrop Grumman, concluding as Vice President for Strategic Management. Then, after a move to Colorado Springs to be nearer his family, Roy actually retired. It is clear to me that Roy and Benita's faith in God allowed them to get through so many challenges. From combat deployment to Vietnam, to professional setbacks, to spaceflight tragedies, and major crises in Roy's various commands, Roy never failed to persevere and succeed. And through personal tragedy, including the early death of his daughter Tanya to cancer, and Roy's recent loss of his beloved wife Benita, Roy has demonstrated a strong inner peace and strength that can be readily seen by those who know him. After his space flight, Roy was asked if he had found God while in space. Responding, he said, "I highly recommend that a person find God before strapping into a rocket." Well said, my friend.
thanks for a great introduction, and for all the other speakers before Dave. I really appreciated everything that was said, and it's a very humbling experience to hear all that and get up here and keep composure and actually be able to say something sensible. And I'm truly honored to share this stage with all those who've been up here, as well as Senator Kelly, who will come up next. He'll be introduced by Pam Milroy, so really an honor to be on the stage here, being honored in this particular way. So when Dave and I showed up at the Johnson Space Center in July of 1980, as members of the second class of shuttle astronauts, I felt a great sense of awe and wonder, because I was one step closer to achieving a childhood dream of participating in our nation's space program. And that really kicked off when I was riding in the family car and heard about Sputnik being launched. And I'm like, wow, gotta be part of this. So I wrote a book about my quest to be an astronaut, and that book was titled An Improbable Astronaut. For a boy who grew up on a poor farm in northeast Georgia, to believe he could be successful in this quest would be considered by most as quite laughable. So I kept it kind of quiet. But it happened, as been mentioned. I flew as a pilot of the 19th Space Shuttle mission aboard the Challenger for 8 days in July and August of 1985. It was a little more exciting mission than I had really opted for, having lost 4 engines before finally getting to orbit. 3 on the pad and 1 en route. But it more than met my expectations of what it would be like flying in space. I already knew I had a second flight that I would start training for right after I landed, and for a moment I felt a little selfish. Of course, I had no intent of giving it up. It took a lot of hard work and an even bigger portion of good luck to get to 0 G's in orbit. I first had to figure out how to land that appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy. And I had read about this in my dad's favorite magazine, the National Geographic, and I went in and said, Dad, hey, this is where I want to go to school. Ha, 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 ha. You got to get a congressional appointment, boy. I don't know anybody. But he would read the paper and see when our Congress was coming to town, and he would dress me in my suit, keep me out of school, and drive me down to the only hotel in town and sit in the car and tell me to cold call the congressman. So I did that 3 or 4 times, and the guy got to know me. And you still had to go through the whole process, but I was very, very fortunate to have received an education and some leadership experiences that proved to be very beneficial in that quest. Now this is a tough thing, because from the 3rd through the 7th grades, I went to a very poor rural school, 2 classes per classroom, no indoor facilities, and students took turns cutting wood for the school's cafeteria, wood-burning stoves. Now I had a little better facilitated schools for 8th through the 12th grade, but the bottom line was that despite these circumstances, the teachers were excellent. So I got a good education. Then I did get into the academy, and the academy at the time was somewhat like, I don't know, some harassment academy. Mental and physical, not to mention the pretty tough academics. But I got a pretty good, solid engineering education, and was ultimately successful in winning a scholarship to go to Purdue right after graduation to get a master's degree in astronautics. And my roommate was my squadron mate at the academy, John Blaha. We both struggled through that master's degree course. The neat thing about that program was I could go immediately to pilot training after the 7 months, which is, I really wanted to fly. I didn't want to go serve 3 or 4 years in an engineering job. So that was really fortunate, great program. And frankly, the tough engineering education I got at both schools meant that, well, my academics at pilot training and even later at test pilot school were kind of a snap. So I could focus on getting ready for my flights. And let me tell you, I was no naturally gifted pilot. In the first airplane, T-41, I got 9 straight fares and got put up for a washout check ride. Now I had a young screamer civilian instructor, but for my check ride, I got the old major who was in charge of the outfit. He just told me what he wanted me to do, didn't say another word until I'd done it all. We landed, he came down and gave me an excellent. I never looked back. So, I managed to get high enough in the class to get the last single-seat fighter that was offered our class. Most people got the back seat of an F-4. I landed a single-seat F-100, which is what I really wanted. And bottom line was, I was able to do well with the rest of my flying training and eventually ended up being the youngest person at the time to get into test pilot school. And I loved the idea of being a test pilot, and I graduated #1 in the test pilot school class. So that meant I could get the only assignment to Edwards Air Force Base, where we were testing new airplanes, and I got assigned to the A-10, as you heard. Later on in my career, I worked on the F-117. But before getting into test pilot school, I had to be lucky enough to survive those 226 missions in Vietnam. And many of them were over the more hazardous North Vietnam. I got pretty close calls, pretty close to death a number of times. But when I almost didn't marry Benita because I was going to go off to war, she said, "What do you mean? I've got a contract with God, you're going to come back." So she kind of put me in my place, and so we got married before I went over there, and fortunately, thanks to her contract, I made it back. Well, eventually, I was interviewed for the class of '78, and as Dave mentioned, I, alas, was not selected. And in the intervening 2 years before the class of '80 was being announced, I was just in a desk job, and I thought, gosh, they didn't like me well enough last time. Why don't they like me better after another couple of years in a desk job? So I didn't apply, and then I get this call from the Military Personnel Center. "Hey, we can't find your application. You got invited for an interview last time, but why haven't you sent any application?" And so I told them why, and they said, "Well, Major, you ought to rethink this." Maybe I was Lieutenant Colonel, I guess. "Maybe you ought to rethink this." So I was working at the time for Lieutenant General Tom Stafford of A-10 fame. So I went in to see General Stafford, explained the situation. I says, "What do you think, General?" And he thought about it for a while, and he says, "Yeah, Roy, I think you ought to give this another shot." So I went home and I erased the date on my previous application. I put the new date on there and I sent it in. And I'm glad I took his advice because I got selected. And after my flight, which you've heard all about, as Dave mentioned, I was already selected for a second flight, which had its own challenges. It was to be the first shuttle Centaur flight. Centaur being a liquid-fueled upper stage. And let me just say it was very problematic. John Young, the head of the astronaut office at the time, called it the Death Star, to give you an idea. And well, we were working through the problems. We would have closed-door meetings because we felt like this was a combat mission and we didn't want the word to get out that we were a little worried about this. And then I was in a flight rules meeting one morning on the day that the Challenger was to launch in January, and the meeting paused while we watched the launch. It never resumed. And eventually, we resolved that no matter what, we were going to get that sucker Centaur canceled. And we did a few months after Challenger. It took a lot of work. Now, I was tended to stay in the astronaut office and help on the return to flight. And I was called by the Military Personnel Center again. Well, you're going to be in charge of so many hundred people and have so many airplanes and different test programs and blah, blah, blah. I says, wait a minute. This is Roy Bridges. Are you sure you've got talking to the right person? I figured the Air Force had forgot about me. I finally went to a party a couple months ago, and we called it the OX party because it was an 06, 07, 08, 09, 010 generals there along with wives. And I don't know, something came up about why did I leave the astronaut office? And the 07, retired 07, he says, well, I know why. Says the Wing Commander at Edwards left, and I put a group of colonels together to look over every colonel in the Air Force who had been to test pilot school, and Bridges was the choice. And then we convinced the 4-star, and so we thought that was that. But he kept saying no. So here I hear from Admiral Truly while I had the kids out at spring break visiting their grandparents in Tucson. He calls me out there and he says, Roy, I went to this social function last night, and this Air Force 4-star general took a bite out of my ass. He said, you've got 100 astronauts and no shuttles to fly for a couple of years, and we just want this one guy, Bridges. And he said, say, this will be a fun job. Why don't you go out and do that? You want to get back in line? I'll make it happen. Well, it was a great job. Started in May of '86 instead of flying in May of '86. But it just wasn't on my bucket list at the time. But like a lot of other things, I didn't really realize how many doors it would open for coming back in a different category to serve our nation and our space program. Well, after I served a couple of years as the wing commander, they said, hey, how'd you like to go down and be the commander of the Eastern Space and Missile Center at Patrick Air Force Base in Cape Canaveral? Yes. Yeah, we're launching expendable launch vehicles for the national security organizations, as well as supporting the space shuttle with range and support services. So that was great. Well, I have to tell one on Brian. I was only there from March until December, because in December they said, I've been promoted, so you're gonna have to go to the headquarters. So I had to take Brian out of school in January and take him up to the new school near Andrews Air Force Base. A family pays a lot in sacrifice for what I've done. Brian, I appreciate you putting up with all that. Well, after several more assignments in the Air Force, which I won't go into detail, including my third tour at Edwards to be the Flight Test Center commander, where we developed some good airplanes like the B-2 and the C-17, I retired from the Air Force after 31 years. Now, people talk about me failing retirement a lot, but this time I only had $4,000 in my savings account, and I knew that's probably not going to get the kids all through college and everything. So I started looking around for a job, and I was surprised to get a call from NASA saying, hey, how'd you like to apply to be the director at this Kennedy Space Center? I thought, are you kidding me? I'd love to do that. So I got accepted and went down to KSC, and let's just say KSC was doing a lot of exciting things, and in addition to launching the shuttle and getting the International Space Station checked out and ready to go to space, we also got the Expendable Launch Vehicle program moved down to Kennedy, and so we were in charge of that program for all of NASA. So there was a lot of good stuff going on. And my motto became, living on the beach and launching rockets for a living, it doesn't get any better than that. So I had a great team at KSC, and I give them the credit for achieving the great things during my 6.5-year tenure. Unfortunately, due to no fault of the KSC team, we lost Columbia and 7 of our friends and colleagues. And for me, it meant leaving KSC earlier than I had planned to be the director at the Langley Research Center. The administrator asked me to go there to set up the NASA Engineering and Safety Center to correct some problems identified by the accident board in both the Challenger and the Columbia mishaps. So the NESC was to be the ultimate authority to look into any potential engineering or safety issues nominated by the chief engineers at each NASA center. And we argued and were successful in getting enough budget to obtain the best minds in government, industry, and academia to investigate these issues and make recommendations to the programs to reduce risk. I've since learned they completed over 500 of these in-depth investigations in their first 10 years of existence, which contributed to many NASA programs being successful. Well, I retired from NASA after getting that all up and running and began a 13-year career with Northrop Grumman, primarily as the business unit director. I did have a lot of contracts, some of which were helping our space program. I'll just mention one. Had a contract at Wallops Island, building and launching sounding rockets for NASA and the Navy. And as mentioned, my last big assignment was VP for operations at our Nevada National Security Site, which is a place where we do a lot of hazardous nuclear and chemical testing for the National Nuclear Security Agency of the Department of Energy. And of course, some of our spacecraft have used some nuclear devices, thermoelectric generators using radioactive materials to generate electricity in aircraft and spacecraft going into deep space for long periods of time, like Cassini. Well, looking back, I enjoyed the many chances that I had to not only fly in space, but contribute as a leader of some great organizations in the USAF, NASA, and industry that have made great advances in our exploration and use of space for all of humanity. Finally, I want to thank the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation for this honor. I never expected to be on this stage. I look forward in contributing in some small ways to the great work that the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation does. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Roy Bridges. And now it's time to introduce our second candidate for induction into the United States Astronaut Hall of Fame, Senator Mark Kelly.
songs to keep you company. Class, say hi. Hi! Here's our first song to get you moving.
This is the 17th flight of the Space Shuttle Endeavour today, the 107th flight in shuttle history. And here come our crew members. Mark Kelly is our pilot, preparing for his first flight into space. 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour.
Welcome to the International Space Station. It's a really big day for us, but I know it's a big day for Expedition 4 also.
And hello to you, Mark. Thanks for your great work in making this possible.
Good job.
Good job.
You're looking over the shoulder of pilot Mark Kelly. This is the view.
We're happy to be back, and we're glad we got to bring Endeavour back in great condition.
America is ready to return to space shuttle flight, so good luck and Godspeed.
Here's our pilot, Mark Kelly, and looking forward for his second mission in space on the 4th of July.
3, 2, 1, mark. You know, the space shuttle is a very complex machine. It's got a lot of moving parts that, move and operate at the limit of what we've been able to engineer. But, this is a risky business, but it's got a big reward. Even everybody on board Discovery and the space station here thinks it's well worthwhile.
Discovery's crew completing a 5.3 million mile mission to restore the International Space Station to an assembly-ready status, proving that they can use a 50-foot long boom as a heat shield repair platform.
Pilot Ken Ham, flight engineer Ron Guerin, and mission specialist Karen Nyberg. Down on the middeck are Mike Fossum, Aki Hoshide, and Greg Shamatov. Throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Mark Kelly. Video shot yesterday by the crew of the shuttle Discovery shortly after reaching orbit.
Hey Mark, you're on camera here. Play with scissors.
Discovery now 137 feet away.
Step 3, final approach. The Kibo module is open.
We installed a Japanese laboratory, did 3 spacewalks, exchanged the crew, and it was really an exciting mission, and we're glad to be back here in Florida.
Separation from the external tank passes through the area of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle in the lower atmosphere. Endeavour's Commander Mark Kelly now.
All right, got here just in time. Here we are in the flight deck of Endeavour, flight day 1.
Welcome back to open space.
You're looking over the shoulder of Shuttle Commander Mark Kelly.
And this is really a new day for science aboard the space station.
Welcome aboard the space station, Your Holiness.
Dear astronauts, I'm very happy to converse with you during your mission.
I think it might be your first night landing. Give us an idea of what do you think it'll be like?
Well, the biggest challenge is it's going to be dark.
All preparations going well.
It's sad to see her land for the last time, but she really has a great legacy.
gentlemen, please welcome Mark Kelly. 'To present Mark Kelly for induction is Hall of Fame astronaut, Deputy Administrator for NASA, Pam Melroy. Pam?
Thank you, everyone. It's really an honor for me to be here to talk about Senator Mark Kelly at his induction. You know, I've been telling people I'm speaking for Mark today, and it is an honor. But then I realized I'm not actually speaking for Mark, I'm speaking for my colleagues at this amazing moment that we get to witness and honor his career. So I am truly excited about that. But first, I would like to mention his family, who is here with us today. His wife, former Representative Gabby Giffords. And of course, his daughters, Claudia and Claire, and granddaughter, Sage. And of course, his twin brother, Scott Kelly, also a U.S. Navy test pilot, astronaut, and Hall of Fame inductee. So Mark and Scott, as the children of two policemen, Richard and Patricia, had a challenging early family life. But their parents left Mark with two lasting gifts. First, the prodding of his father about the impact of grades on his future life. I believe the words were something along the lines of, "Son, if you don't improve your grades, you should be looking at vocational school." Secondly, they gave Mark a very long leash and the heartfelt belief that you could do anything if you put your mind to it. And you clearly put your mind to it. As has been mentioned, Mark graduated from the Merchant Marine Academy and went on to become a naval aviator, piloting 39 combat missions in Desert Storm, and then went on to become a Navy test pilot in 1994, and then ultimately a member of the Sardine class, 1996. The Sardines are nearing full force today. Alongside his brother Scott and colleagues from the Navy Test Pilot School and friends. You know, really, Mark had a phenomenal career as an astronaut by any measure. It was fascinating to listen, congratulations Roy, by the way, to some of the achievements of the early part of the shuttle missions, the things that we learned, the changes that have happened. But I think in a lot of ways, Mark's career has been defined by some truly epic moments coming up to the end of the shuttle program, but most especially around the International Space Station. And so many of his missions represented some of the most historic moments that we had for shuttle and both space station. So his first flight in December 2001, STS-108, which was a mission to bring science and logistics as well as a new crew and logistics module to the International Space Station. But significantly, I'd like to mention it was actually the first space shuttle mission after 9/11. And a wonderful side focus of the flight was to honor the fallen, especially the police officers and other first responders. Does Sage want to come up and sit with me? Nope, she's found a flower. Doesn't matter. Mark, your second flight was an extremely difficult and impactful one. Again, another moment in history for the Space Shuttle program, the second return to flight mission after the tragic loss of Columbia. There were literally too many things that we needed to understand about new safety and repair techniques to get done on the first return to flight. And so you launched, as rockets should, on the 4th of July, which is wonderful, and worked very hard with your crew to test out new safety and repair techniques that were literally used on every single subsequent flight of the space shuttle and influenced the history of the shuttle and station, protecting future missions and future astronauts. Mark went on to command STS-124, the delivery of one of the heaviest payloads the space shuttle ever carried, the largest module on the ISS, the Japanese laboratory element known as Kibo, or HOPE in Japanese. This is a very, very significant moment for the International Space Station. Kibo is one of the most productive science elements on board ISS. And it was significant that you were there to shepherd its successful integration into the station. And then, of course, when you were assigned to command STS-134, the second to last space shuttle mission ever, to deliver the alpha magnetic spectrometer to the ISS. So, as the administrator already told you the story, just 4 months to go, the love of his life, Representative Gabby Giffords, was horrifically shot, along with 18 others in Arizona. The world has been inspired by the love and determination you both showed throughout your recovery, Gabby. All of us know what it takes to go on a shuttle mission, and especially to command it. And personal tragedy has struck before other astronauts, and they have a brutal decision to make about what to do next. There's a lot to the story, but I will tell you that with the complete and full support of his wife, his family, his crew, and all of NASA leadership, Mark chose to continue and take his crew up to space. It was really an enormously successful and impactful mission because the instrument that was installed, the alpha magnetic spectrometer, was designed, how about this, to measure antimatter in cosmic rays. Yeah. Really a super foundational piece of equipment to help us understand dark matter and the beginning of the universe. Before there was James Webb Space Telescope, and before Nancy Grace Roman, which will launch after it, AMS has been laying the foundation of understanding dark matter and the early universe. So enormous science contributions, and we're grateful to you and your crew for delivering that. Mark left after this final mission to support Gabby and his family, and to find new ways to inspire and serve. And one of his important contributions was the astronaut twin study, which is one of my personal favorites. So when Scott went on the first year-long mission to ISS, it was Scott's idea to say, hey, maybe we should be looking at genetic differences between the two of us as identical twins. Well, there's a whole field of study to understand the changes in gene expression from exposure to environment, and it's called epigenetics. It's a fairly new discipline, but it's incredibly important. And so being able to compare Scott and his medical situation with Mark, who has stayed on the ground, helped us understand how gene expression changes in microgravity. This really followed on decades of what was really anecdotal science. We knew some things. We knew that there were immune suppression issues and others. But this piece of research allowed us to home in and actually find out what literally was happening in the human body. Now, I have a quick story to tell you. Mark had left the agency by then. So he was willing to volunteer his time, substantial personal time, taking medical samples, doing medical testing so that he could, everything paralleling what Scott was doing. And then, of course, the US government came back and said, you can't volunteer. There's nothing that lets you volunteer. Really? So Scott became, from an astronaut commander, the lowest paid employee of NASA working for minimum wage. True story. Thank you, though, for that work, which not only is affecting our understanding of the human body here on Earth, but again is protecting future astronauts as we go out into the solar system. And also on that same mission that Scott flew, Mark added to his substantial list of firsts by being the first to send a gorilla suit to space, just to lighten things up for Scott. So if you want to go and find out what happened after that, go look online, it's everywhere. But I'd like to talk about Mark as our colleague for a moment. One of the great joys of preparing for this was to talk to so many of your crewmates. And over and over, they talk about your leadership, about how you care for your team, and how you look out for every member of your crew. And the phrase I heard most often about Mark was, "He's got your back." Whether it was always being available to fly with any mission specialist who asked, and believe me, there were times in the office when pilots were not available, providing advice and support to numerous people. And he was the one person his colleague, Julie Payette, called in the middle of the night for help when she was called to come into NASA to cover Capcom at the last minute, but she was home alone with a baby sleeping in the crib. Needless to say, in the middle of the night, Mark was the one who went to her side to help. In 2020, Mark took a new step in his life, inspired by Gabby and her service in Congress. Although Mark does joke that the only person less likely to run for political office than him is his brother Scott, I don't actually think we should be surprised that he took this step on his journey again towards public service, which of course Administrator Nelson understands better than most. His staff tells me that he brings a completely different perspective to the job. Now, I think it's important to know that Mark has chosen to focus on his constituency as well as the Armed Services Committee. He has steadfastly resisted being on the Space Oversight Committee. We're coming for you, Mark. It's gonna happen. But his colleagues do consider him a resource and constantly ask for his advice. Instead, he's really focused on calm bipartisan leadership on things such as the CHIPS Act, which affect all Americans. I should also mention he's famous for his ability to keep himself awake on long overnight voting marathons in Congress. Must be that Navy training. Mark, your achievements are profound and hugely impactful on the space program, which is why you're here. So it's an honor to see you being inducted into the Hall of Fame, but it's your kindness, your boundless giving, and your friendship that also make it a joy. Mark Kelly.
Good afternoon, everybody. So great to be here. How great is this, being under Atlantis? That's pretty cool. I have to say, it was fun for that period of time being a minimum wage employee. NASA is very generous. No, they really are. I mean, it was so, for me to have the opportunity to volunteer and give back to an agency that has given me so much. Was really one of the highlights of my service at NASA, but after I left. So to NASA, thank you very much. To everybody who's here today, ladies and gentlemen, my former colleagues, a bunch of my crew members that I flew in space with, a couple guys that I flew in space with more than once are here. It is so great to have family, friends, colleagues, and distinguished guests here today. And it is such an honor. It is really such an honor to be inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame. And I'm grateful. I am grateful to be born in a country where the sons of two police officers who watched the Apollo missions from their living room floor can go on to reach the heights of the world's greatest space program. And this makes me think of our parents, who are no longer with us. Now, they had no idea that they were raising 2 astronauts, but they raised us to value public service. And my mom, in particular, set an example of hard work and dedication that inspired my brother and me to pursue our dreams. And Scott, you beat me to this one. But as special as it is, or was, to be an astronaut, nothing compares to doing it with your clone. But in all seriousness, the list of human beings who have made a greater contribution to space exploration than my brother Scott is very, very short. And it means even more to me to be joining these ranks with you. So thank you. And to my daughters, Claudia and Claire, usually it's the parents who make sacrifices for their kids to chase their dreams. But with us, it was often the other way around. And you watched me leave this planet from about 5 miles over there 4 times, knowing that you would go weeks without seeing me and really concerned if I was ever going to come back or not. And Claudia, you put up with me answering your teacher's email from space when you didn't do your homework. And you never complained about it until last week. So thank you for everything, and I am so proud of the women you've become. And to my wife, Gabby, thanks for the years of putting up with the commuter marriage, sometimes to space, so that we could both serve our country the best ways that we knew how at the time. Thank you. Thank you for supporting me, including in the most difficult period in our lives, after you were shot while serving in Congress. I mean, you faced such a difficult road back to recovery. And I agonized. I agonized over the decision of whether to move forward and fly my last space shuttle flight, STS-134. But then, as always, you were the best friend and partner that I could ever ask for. Thank you. So receiving this honor, I can't help but reflect on the journey here from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy to flying in the Navy in Operation Desert Storm, to becoming a test pilot, and eventually getting that call from Dave Leesma, who's here, right here, from Dave, to tell me that I was selected to be an astronaut. And as hard as it is to become an astronaut, it's actually pretty hard once you get there. On my first 2 flights, I learned. I was fortunate. I learned from some of the greatest space shuttle commanders, Don Gorey and Steve Lindsay, who taught me how to do this job. And I think do it pretty well. And on my second 2 flights, I happened to be in charge of just terrific crews on successful missions to carry some valuable and groundbreaking capabilities up to the ISS. Now, STS-134, I think, was the last mission for a few of us. And it was the second to last mission for the shuttle program, and it was the final flight of Space Shuttle Endeavour, the baby of the fleet. And I often say, I think folks have heard me say this before, that the space shuttle was the best spaceship ever built, at least for now. And it was a pretty good rocket ship. But this thing was also the worst airplane I've ever flown in my life. And I'll always be proud to be a part of the shuttle program, especially being the commander of Space Shuttle Endeavour when it touched down safely for the very last time. And because, even with all these good memories that we all have, there probably isn't a day at NASA I remember more vividly than February 1st, 2003, when Columbia disintegrated on re-entry. For me, that day began with a phone call from my brother Scott, and continued with a trip on a helicopter to Nacogdoches, and then Hemp Hill, Texas. I spent that day and the next retrieving the remains of our STS-107 colleagues. It was personal in ways that most can't imagine. And it was hard. And it was also necessary. And I'm so thankful that myself and others were there on the ground for our fallen friends, 3 of whom were in my astronaut class. These explorers made the ultimate sacrifice, and I think of them so very often. Now, some of us are singled out as somewhat special for our astronaut careers, but the reality is that anyone who crams themselves into a pressure suit, puts on a helmet and some boots from Walmart, and then, climbs onto the top of a rocket for their country is worthy of the same recognition. It is a difficult and dangerous job. And it's those risks that create the opportunity to do the extraordinary things that each and every one of us signs up for. To gain that perspective of seeing the planet from above against the vastness and blackness of space that so very few humans have seen. And to learn about our planet, our solar system, and ourselves. That makes it, especially hard to leave. Now, earlier I heard somebody mention a Senate appropriation up here. So maybe later Senator Nelson and I can have another discussion about members of Congress going into space. Bill, I gotta say, I'm all for this. It's a fantastic idea. In all seriousness though, ultimately, for me, after safely completing STS-134, I retired from the Navy and NASA to support Gabby through her recovery and rehabilitation. And stepping away from NASA was the correct decision for me. But it didn't leave me without envy for what the space program has accomplished in the years that followed. It's been a lot. Over the past 12 years since I left, our space program has been just leaping forward. The commercial crew and cargo programs have American astronauts and payloads flying on American rockets from American soil into space once again. And NASA recently announced the crew for Artemis 2, which is going to fly by the moon, sending humans the furthest into space we've seen since the Apollo program that inspired my brother and me decades ago. And after they succeed, it'll be back to the surface of the moon and beyond. Now, I had a dream when I was a kid that I could be the first person to walk on the planet Mars. I didn't quite make it. But I believe that person is alive today. They could be in elementary school or completing college. Or maybe about an hour ago, I spoke to this young woman upstairs around Atlantis. She was probably 12. She had great questions about rocket fuel, propulsion, and getting to Mars. Her name was Brooke. I don't know if she's in the audience, but she put her hand up. She might be that person that goes to Mars. Only time is going to tell. But just as always, NASA's arrow is pointed up towards the stars, as it should be. And I'll support these ambitions from my new job in the United States Senate, where I have the great honor of representing the state of Arizona. Because I know that our country and humanity are destined to continue exploring, and that we all benefit from the scientific, engineering, and medical breakthroughs that come from a robust space program, always pushing the limits of what is possible. And our space program also shows us the possibilities that come with international cooperation with our partners and allies, even if recently we have also seen the challenges and the limits of that cooperation. So to have played a part, a small part in the world's greatest space program is a privilege. To have been singled out for this recognition is truly an honor. So thank you. Thank you again to the Astronaut Foundation and to the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame. And thank you all for being here. Thank you very much.